Welcome to episode 10 of the Red Book Podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. In the previous episode, I discussed some of the themes of the Fellowship of the Ring, the corruptive influence of power, good and evil, mythology and history, a world in decline, home, and finally friendship. You can listen to that episode here or on YouTube, and I will be continuing that thematic discussion in future episodes about the Two Towers and the Return of the King. The Red Book is an ongoing project that is almost 2 years old now, and while this is only the 10th episode of the podcast, there are many videos you can watch on YouTube at The Red Book. If you want to support me in making episodes and videos, you can become a member on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. You'll have access to members-only content and discussions, as well as helping me decide on future content. Links to everything can always be found in the description. Today, I'm going to discuss the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, Gil-galad. Specifically, I will be talking about his confusing parentage and lineage. The issue of Gil-galad's father is one that still seems to be debated today, and is an issue that shows how vast and complex the detail within Tolkien's world really is. Tolkien didn't have everything worked out. His legendarium took decades. It has revisions, changes, and complications. It can be argued that J.R.R. Tolkien's attention to detail as an author and world builder is second to none, but the legendarium is not perfectly consistent. There are cracks, unfinished details, and let's face it, errors. Which is fine if you're someone like me who views this as a mythology and a work that was ongoing and incomplete. Others like Christopher Tolkien made editorial decisions that shape how many of us view the legendarium today, but not all decisions were good ones. The History of Middle-earth volumes can really highlight the monumental effort that went into making changes to achieve some consistency by J.R.R. and Christopher Tolkien. My aim here is to highlight the changes related to Gil-galad's father and why it is possible that a simple question such as, who is his father, can have multiple answers. Gil-galad was the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, despite Fëanor being the first son of the first of the kings of the Noldor, Finwë. It is typically accepted that the title of High King is first associated with Fingolfin, Finwë's second son. Following the death of Fëanor, his eldest son Maethros gave up any claim to kingship, and he supported Fingolfin. When Fingolfin fell in his duel with the Dark Lord Morgoth, it passed to his first son Fingon, who then perished in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The kingship then passed to the second son of Fingolfin, Turgon, who died in the fall of Gondolin. With his death, Gil-galad was then known as the High King. Gil-galad being the king after Turgon is partly why Tolkien made changes to his lineage, as I will discuss. He is probably best known to readers as the High King of the Noldor who stood alongside the High King of the Dunedain in Middle-earth, Elendil, against the Dark Lord Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance in the Second Age, falling side by side with Elendil in a duel against Sauron that ended the war. His life and death being told to us in the lay called The Fall of Gil-galad, where Aragorn, descendant of Elendil, tells us, "But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are." His death is well documented, as is his reign as the High King of the Noldor, bearer of the Ring of Power Vilya that he passed on to Elrond, who held it throughout the Third Age, and the many names he held. But the exact place and date of his birth is never provided, which is strange considering the depth of genealogy that can be studied in Tolkien's work, especially when it comes to prominent figures such as Gil-galad, a king who was a great enemy of Sauron in the Second Age, from the time of the forging of the rings, to a battle in Mordor itself ushering in a new age. And who he descends from is really more of a talking point than even the mystery of his unknown land of birth and when that occurred. Let's look at why there is a problem, and I apologise for the sheer number of names that will be getting thrown around here. This is unfortunately a discussion that will make a lot more sense to those familiar with the Silmarillion rather than the Lord of the Rings. It may make sense to start from the beginning, but I want to first talk about J.R.R. Tolkien's final say in his last writings before his death. According to Tolkien, Gil-galad was the son of Orodreth, the king of Nargothrond, son of Angrod, grandson of Finarfin, who is the king of the Noldor in Valinor, not Middle-earth, and nephew of Finrod. Quite a family tree. The interesting part here is that there is no text or version of the tale written by Tolkien to back up this claim. It is Christopher Tolkien who explains the situation, telling us how his father apparently solved the problem of Gil-galad's father. Christopher tells us in The History of Middle-earth, Volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth, in the Shibboleth of Fëanor, which is Chapter 11, that there was an isolated note found within the genealogies, seemingly scribbled at great speed, but dated August 1965. This note was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, and he suggested that the best solution to the problem of Gil-galad's parentage was to find him in the son of Orodreth, who is here given the Quenya name Artaresto. He continues, Finrod left his wife in Valinor and had no children in exile. Angrod's son was Artaresto, who was beloved by Finrod and escaped when Angrod was slain in the Battle of the Sudden Flame, and dwelt with Finrod. Finrod made him his steward, and he succeeded him in Nargothrond. His Sindarin name was Rodreth, altered to Orodreth because of his love of the mountains. His children were Findulias and Artanaro, or Rodnor, later called Gil-galad. Their mother was a Sindarin lady of the north. She called her son Gil-galad. Rodnor Gil-galad escaped the sacking of Nargothrond, and eventually came to Sirion's mouth and was king of the Noldor there. That seems simple enough, except perhaps the point about Finrod having a wife, which I will get into. But if it was that easy, then why is there debate and confusion? What was the problem? It is because, like with many things, Tolkien changed his thoughts on the matter through various stages of his writing. This was very late in his writing, but by looking through earlier text, it is possible to call Gil-galad the son of Finrod, or Fingon, or the grandson of Fëanor with an unknown father. That is before Tolkien solved the problem and found him to be the son of Orodreth. Now we should go back to the earliest version of this character's lineage, where he is the grandson of the most infamous of elves, Fëanor, a figure we now see as being father of his 7 sons, who swore the dreadful oath with him, a rebel who is responsible for much of the hardship suffered by the Noldor. Gil-galad, as a grandson of the legendary maker of the Silmarils, is found in the History of Middle-earth Volume 5, The Lost Road and Other Writings, specifically Chapter 2, the second version of the Fall of Numenor. And it is said that in Beleriand there arose a king, who was of Númenórean race, and he was named Elendil, that is, elf friend. And he took counsel with the elves that remained in Middle-earth, and these abode then mostly in Beleriand. And he made a league with Gil-galad, the elf king who was descended from Fëanor. This still doesn't list who would be his father, but it's an interesting point in this character's development nonetheless. This causes some complications to arise in terms of which son of Fëanor would be Gil-galad's father, problems with the Oath of Fëanor and its consequences, and the line of Fëanor in the Second Age, following the loss of the Silmarils and the fall of Morgoth. It was an idea that was not carried forward, and Gil-galad had his ancestry changed. To make things even more complicated and confusing, some names of figures at this stage of Tolkien's writings are different from what we would call them today. Case in point, Gil-galad was found to be the son of Inglor Felagund, a name that was later changed to Finrod. And at this time, Felagund was the son of Finarfin, who was actually called Finrod at this stage of the Legendarium. I told you it would be confusing. This can be found in the same volume of the History of Middle-earth, but in the section of the Fall of Numenor detailing the further development of the Fall. But that land where Luthien had dwelt remained, and it was called Lindon. A gulf of the sea came through it, and a gap was made in the mountains through which the river Lune flowed out. But in the land that was north and south of the gulf, the elves remained, and Gil-galad, son of Felagund, son of Finrod, was their king. And they made havens in the Gulf of Lune, whence any of their people, or any other of the elves that fled from the darkness and sorrow of Middle-earth, could sail into the true west and return no more. Now, what was the problem here, except some names being different? Well, Tolkien realised that Gil-galad could not be the son of Felagund after making changes to the character of Felagund, demonstrating once again that one character being changed has an effect on other parts of the Legendarium. Felagund no longer had a wife, but was in love with a figure named Amari. At the time Gil-galad was his son, Felagund was married to Meril, and they were sent to the havens of the Falas. But Felagund now had no wife, and no wife means no children, and Gil-galad needed to be placed elsewhere once again. I discussed the issue with marriage and children in a video answering the question, why isn't Middle-earth overpopulated? Where was Gil-galad placed? He became the son of Fingon, as described in the Grey Annals, found in the History of Middle-earth Volume 11, The War of the Jewels. This part follows a description of Fingolfin's fall against Morgoth at Angband. Then in great sorrow, Fingon took the lordship of the House of Fingolfin and the kingdom of the Noldor. And there's a late penciled addition, but his young son, Gil-galad, he sent to the havens. As I said earlier, with Felagund falling in love with someone but not becoming wed to them, no children would be present in that relationship. Tolkien managed to work this into the story of Felagund and his fate, to swear an oath to Barahir and his descendants, which would lead to his death in protecting Beren from a werewolf during the quest for the Silmaril in the dungeons of Sauron in Tol and Gawarhoth. Felagund, early in the tale when asked by Galadriel, his sister, why he had no wife, would have foresight come upon him and know in his heart that he would swear an oath that must allow him to be free to fulfill it and go into darkness. Nor shall anything of all my realm endure that a son should inherit, were his words to her. This brings me to Gil-galad and Fingon. Any of you can pick up a copy of the Silmarillion and read that Gil-galad is Fingon's son. This is really less to do with where to put Gil-galad and more about the figure Orodrith. Like Galadriel, Gil-galad was quite a late addition to the Legendarium when compared to some more established figures who'd been around since the early writings like the Fall of Gondolin, for example. Gil-galad really appears in the Silmarillion, a book edited and published after Tolkien's death, as a child who had been sent to the havens by various figures in various texts at different times. Everything written in the Silmarillion is not all the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. For example, the chapter of the Ruin of Doriath was written by Christopher with the help of author Guy Gavriel Kay, seen as a necessity to complete the narrative. Other chapters are made up of drafts of various stages of completion from various times. It's one reason why the final chapter of Quenta Silmarillion, of the Voyage of Eärendil and the War of Roth, seems quite rushed, taking in some parts that would have been found in Tolkien's writings about the last battle. Christopher explaining in the foreword to the book that he was providing a complete narrative, or attempting to, not rewriting the story. His respect of his father's material must be applauded, because he had permission and the blessing of his father to do that, but chose not to. One problem here is that Fingon being Gil-galad's father creates a problem with the kingship of the Noldor. If Gil-galad was the son of Fingon, then surely he should have become king instead of Turgon, and not after him. This is partly why it's a good thing that Tolkien changed Gil-galad's father to Orodrith. This makes Fingon childless, forcing Turgon to be his heir through being the younger brother and another son of Fingolfin, the previous king. Having Turgon be king before Gil-galad in the published Silmarillion only makes sense if we create reasons for the line of succession working this way. Gil-galad's age, or the support and authority already held by Turgon, for example. I think Tolkien's change tidies things up a bit. This also caused a problem with Gil-galad and Orodrith from a writing point of view. The section I quoted earlier in the episode about Gil-galad being the son of Orodrith had not been written into any narrative, none whatsoever. But J.R.R. Tolkien had written a narrative where Orodrith was a son of Finarfin, which had implications for Gil-galad's place in the Legendarium. Tolkien's intention in his genealogical texts was to have Orodrith become the son of Angrod and Finarfin's grandson rather than his son, which would place Gil-galad as Orodrith's son. But what was Christopher to do in this situation? He saw this as a complicated and major change when publishing the Silmarillion, choosing to leave out his father's last thoughts in the matter in exchange for providing us with a more complete narrative that his father had written. Christopher ignored it to provide the narrative, but even states himself that he made a mistake by providing Gil-galad's parentage in the narrative. Gil-galad became the son of Fingon when it should have been left as an unknown, ambiguous, or steps should have been taken to edit according to his father's late writings on this character. This is discussed in more detail in the parentage of Gil-galad section of the Shibboleth of Fëanor referenced earlier. The Silmarillion is not perfect, and doesn't 100% reflect the ideas of J.R.R. Tolkien. It's why we have constant debates about the origin of orcs, with the Silmarillion stating that they came from an original corruption of elves, which was just one idea put forward by Tolkien himself, which he didn't really carry forward into late writings. But does that stop most people from stating it as a fact? No. Why? Because it's in the Silmarillion. It's why the story has a flat Arda which was changed to a round world through the changing of the world by the hand of Eru when Númenor fell. Even though Tolkien had started to transform the myth, with Arda always being a round world. But the out-of-date complete narrative already existed, and that's what we read. But I'm not complaining. The publication is a testament to the complexity of the Legendarium, the dedication of Christopher to provide us with as complete a narrative as possible. It's a wonder that it is as complete as it is due to the circumstances. It's also a shame that important writing such as the Athrabith Finrod a Andarith were left out as well, with some people speaking heresy by describing one of the greatest pieces of Tolkien's creativity as not a part of the canon, because Christopher couldn't fit it into the Silmarillion. My message here being, don't take the Silmarillion as gospel. Read what was left out. Read about editorial decisions and amazing essays and stories that you will find in Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle-earth volumes. The Legendarium is far bigger than just The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion. I can only summarise and say that according to the Silmarillion, Gil-galad is the son of Fingon, but Christopher, its editor, states that this was an ephemeral idea that he later regretted. We are left discussing and debating, is Gil-galad the son of Fingon or Orodrith? Personally, I take the word of J.R.R. Tolkien, even if the possibility exists that he may have changed his mind again. He says he solved the problem, and I take Gil-galad to be the son of Orodrith, but would never claim that those who say he is the son of Fingon are wrong to say so. I put no stock in what is apparently canon or true, when we have so many versions or traditions as I like to call them. It's the Legendarium, a mythology, a complex collection of various writings and histories from decades of creative input. Tolkien solved the problem of Gil-galad's parentage, but that is still unlikely to ever end the debate. Gil-galad's parentage is just one of the many topics that become relevant when discussing the so-called canon of Middle-earth. The many different viewpoints people have when reading Tolkien's works, and what is considered to be the right version or what is true, what can be discarded. One book's version being considered to be correct, even when the editor says he made a mistake in it. It's a phenomenon almost unique to Tolkien due to the nature of the work, and what has been published and when. This talk of canon and my attitude towards it will be a future episode of this podcast, as I find it to be one of the most fascinating and frustrating topics when it comes to discussions about Tolkien's Legendarium. I want to thank you for listening to this episode and remind you that you can support this project via YouTube or Patreon by following the links in the description. I also want to give a shout out to my biggest supporters, Ailyn, Grant, David, Joel, Oliver and Victus. I hope you enjoyed this one and will return for the next chapter of the Red Book.